I am delighted to see people on Zoom, as well as people around the tables here today. So I think what we'll do is just get right to introducing our speaker after I make a lovely announcement. This is my last moment as your president. The newsletter article, loved every minute of it. It's been interesting, every minute of it. Sometimes a challenge, but I will tell you, working with the people in this guild has been a pleasure. And I introduce to you Wanda Johansson, who is going to be following me. And I guarantee you, you will have the next best year of your life in this guild. Working with Wanda is going to be Wendy Pear as Secretary Vice President, and Lisa Lewis will continue as Treasurer. So after our speaker, then I'm sure do a vote to make sure that this is all lovely and on board. But before then, I'd like to introduce Annie McHale. She is a long time Inkle weaver. As a matter of fact, her website or her email is what, band weaver, or I weave bands or something that just says exactly what she does. She is able to do hundreds and hundreds of patterns on just a narrow piece of fabric. She has recently been here to Whidbey Island to a workshop that some of you were able to attend. So I'm sure that was interesting. She's been featured on Textiles and Tea. She has a YouTube channel, Etsy shops. Her website is full of ideas and information. And whether or not you think you know everything there is to know about Inkle weaving, today you will learn something new. Annie, take it away.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me back a second time. I gave a presentation just a couple of years ago to your guild. And as was mentioned, I was just in Whidbey Island. So those of you who are in that guild and attended that meeting, you may see some overlap between what I'm going to present today and what I presented there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think that one of the things that sets me apart from a lot of other weavers is that I don't do other kinds of weaving. I just do Inkle weaving. That's my one thing. So what I'm going to talk about today is designing some things to think about in designing Inkle bands. It seems pretty simple, Inkle weaving, but there's a lot to it, especially if you devote 5 decades of your life, as I have, to Inkle weaving. You'll find some tricks. So I want to share some of those things with you. I started weaving as a 17-year-old in the 1970s. I was intrigued by the simple way to make practical items. In these photographs, the one on the right was taken about 3 decades later in my home in California, and the picture on the bottom is me in my current home in New Mexico out on the deck weaving. You may notice that the Inkle loom sits in my lap. I don't weave at a table. I never tire of creating new things, and Inkle weaving has just been satisfying all along. When I started in the 70s, there were a lot of books on Inkle weaving, or quite a few of them. And at that time, they were all in black and white. So this was one of my favorite books. I learned a lot from it. But if you look at the inset, there's the patterns were just kind of, X's and O's in boxes, and they weren't really very juicy, and they didn't really show you what you could make. So it required a lot of imagination. And none of the pattern charts were illustrated in color. So after my many years and thousands of experiments, I learned some things about using color in Inkle bands. And it seemed to me that I was seeing a lot of discussion online about, well, what can you what kind of cool thing can you do in an Inkle band? You have to learn pickup or a fancy technique. And I disagreed strongly. So I used my information to create a book with a lot of color that's only about plain weave. Some of the stuff in this presentation is straight out of the book and with a lot more examples. So the topics I want to cover today are: how many colors should you use? What are the limitations? A little bit about plain weave versus pickup, visual effects of yarns, some of my best tips on how to use color, a little bit about asymmetrical and symmetrical designs, some ways to preview your colors and designs, some ways to choose combinations, and some tools. So my book, In Celebration of Plain Weave, was really made possible by something that came to me as a complete surprise. In 2018, I received a message from a gentleman in France who had taken up inkle weaving and found inspiration in my blog. Being a computer programmer, he created his own inkle weaving design program, which he shared for free. And when he introduced me to it, I thought it would be the perfect thing to illustrate my book. And with his permission, I did use it for both of my books. It's a free online tool, which I love. It allows me to play around with patterns. This is one of my favorite pages from the book because it has basically one pattern shown in 12 different colorways. So that pattern can look very different, whether there's a high contrast, a low contrast, bright colors, muted colors. With this type of pattern, the top two rows are the warping draft, and the bottom part is the drawdown, or what the pattern is going to look like when woven. It very closely represents what the woven band looks like, as you can see in this example. It's been really helpful for me, especially when I'm doing custom orders, which I do a lot of, because then I can kind of mock up the design and show the customer give them some choices ahead of time. The pattern editor's attributes are way too many to mention. It does all kinds of things that I've never used it for. It does lots of pickup patterns, card weaving patterns, balanced weaves. You can import colors from a photo. You can save custom color palettes. And it has a row tracker. So if you're doing a pickup pattern, you can track row by row your progress. Inkle weaving does have some serious limitation as far as color goes because it creates a warp-faced fabric. The weft doesn't show, only at the very edge of the band as a spot of color where it turns to go into the next row. In these three examples here, I started out with the same warp and made a couple changes as I went along. I wove 3 hat bands on one warp. The one on the left, I used a red weft, so you can see the little red spots along the edge. The one on the right, I used a turquoise weft, so you can see that along the edges. And the one in the center, I used a purple weft to match the borders in the band. If you look at these 3 bands closely, there's a couple other differences. The one on the right is simply turquoise and 2 shades of purple. The one in the center has a dark burgundy line in there, and the one on the left also has another red line or stripe in there. So I actually cut out a couple of warps. After I wove the first one, I cut and removed the red warp. The second one, I cut and removed the burgundy. So I got 3 similar but different looking headbands or hat bands on the same warp. This edge treatment is one that I discovered, and I thought it looks really interesting. It looks like a 3-strand braid that was achieved by putting one single thread of yellow on the edge and a single thread of red next to it and using the brown weft. So when the three colors mix in your eye, it looks like a braid. The narrowness of your weaving is a limitation as well. I typically work with 80 or less warp threads. So how many colors can I really use? Well, this was the maximum, 22 colors to create a rainbow with a lot of gradation to it. Unfortunately, I think I mixed up some of the colors in the gradient and I should have used the black and white photo trick, which I'll show later. When I began, and certainly for many years, I felt that 3 colors was a good number to work with. It was easy enough to get interesting patterns, not too complex, not too complicated. That's usually what I recommend to students when they're beginning. You can sort of see what's going to happen with 3 colors, but as time has gone on, I'm seeing inkle weaving maybe more as an art form than it was as a practical craft at the beginning. And I love colors and patterns. And so this is a way for me to play with them. I currently use maybe 5 to 9 colors in a piece. And they have more depth and more interest to them than the earlier pieces. By adding the extra colors, I can get subtle color shifts and gradients and blending and more contrast and all sorts of things. Design is an arrangement of shapes and blank space in between the shapes. So this should be taken into consideration when you're planning a piece. If there's too many shapes, too many patterns, or elements crowded together, if there's not enough background space in between, then the design becomes too busy. Your eyes just don't have any place to rest. So I see the one on the left as being kind of a very clear pattern, and the one on the right is a different version of that. I've added more colors into that design. But in my opinion, the design is now very, very busy, and it's just not as distinct as the design on the left. These elements are all important to creating a really great design. First, you have to have a harmonious color combination, a contrast in color value, very important, balanced proportions of colors, color placement and relationships, and an overall balance of design elements like the stripes, the chains, the blocks, the ladders, etc. This board has samples pinned to it. I've woven about 1,200 guitar straps at this point. That is my main thing that I've been producing. And all these were leftover pieces, which I've pinned to the board just to show a variety. So in plain weave, the warp threads naturally go over one weft, under the next, and form the pattern during the weaving process. The pattern itself is less important than the colors. That was a thing my husband said to me while I was working on the book. And in plain weave, I think he's right. The pattern is what allows the colors to interact, mix and mingle in certain proportions. Pickup patterns require the weaver to literally pick up and or drop some threads out of their normal sequence, creating floats on the surface. Of the 12 straps pictured here, 4 of them have pickup patterns, and I bet that those jump out at you visually because they're so different. Here is the same photograph in black and white, and I think it's even more evident. The patterns are embossed on the top of the band when the pickup threads are present. On the left is a photograph of one of Laverne Waddington's really striking pebble weave designs that she made into a guitar strap. And the one on the right is a guitar strap that I wove in plain weave using similar colors. And I think with hers, that the pattern is what really catches your eye. Again, here's the same photographs in black and white, and I think that's even more evident. When choosing yarn for inkle weaving, it's important to note that different yarns have different visual effects, as well as, the stiffness, pliability, and texture of the band. This is the same pattern woven in 6 different yarns. The one on the left is rug wool. It's kind of fuzzy. The one next to it is a DK weight cotton yarn, mercerized. The one next to that is a combination of hemp and linen. And because of the tight twist of the hemp and linen, the rows didn't pack up quite as neatly as they did if you compare it to the one on its left. And then going over to the right, one more, we have cotton carpet warp, which is not mercerized, so it has a duller finish to it than the others. To its right is a crochet nylon, which is very shiny. And the one on the right is a number 10 crochet cotton. So that pattern on the right is more compact, right? The smaller the yarn, the more compact. It's possible to use different types of yarn in the same piece as long as they have the same degree of elasticity. If one is stretchy and one isn't, that can be a problem. But the twist, texture, and sheen of different yarns can create more visual interest. In the one on the left, there is a shiny, I'm going to call that color pink, kind of a lavender pink rayon, which is the same. The rayon thread is indicated by the arrow there, but it's about the same color as the cotton towards the center of the band, but that sheen, the way it catches the light, just makes that line stand out a little bit more. The piece on the right is a combination of many things: pearl cotton and a couple of different weights, number 10 crochet cotton, embroidery floss, silk, and that white in the center is a mystery yarn. So it's got different visual textures. Some of the yarns look more pebbly on the surface, and some of them just kind of blend into the ones next to them. In these 2 pieces, yarns with S twist and Z twist create interesting visual effects when used together. I think it's maybe more noticeable in the band on the left. If you look at the lighter colored yellow towards the center of the band, and where it comes up against the green, it almost looks like those 2 are creating little V shapes, because one has an S twist and one has a V. They visually look like they're going different directions. Not as noticeable as the one in the one on the right, but still there's a little bit of that going on. One of the fun things of mixing different yarns. What I learned to be one of my biggest surprises when choosing colors is that undertones create surprising effects. And that was, I would think, oh, well, all these yarns here are gray. I should be able to use any of those together. But the one on the far right really has a very pink or sometimes lavender looking undertone. The one in the center is very bluish, and the one on the left is really looks more like a beige, but they're really all gray. And so what I've learned is to be careful about those and test the yarns out next to each other before I put them together in a weaving. You never see colors separately. They really play off of what's next to them. Of all the color attributes, I think value is the most crucial in band weaving. A high contrast will produce a popping design, and a low contrast will produce a more subtle one. Having tools to compare values as you're choosing your color is very helpful, because the naked eye can be misled. Now, the easiest way nowadays is to use the black and white setting in your camera your phone camera. That's what I meant. When you take away the color, viewing yarns through a black and white filter, the value contrast is very evident. That's probably the tool we all have. This is another tool which has been used by quilters for many years, plexiglass filters in red and green. You can see in that photo at the bottom, by laying that red plexiglass filter over there, you don't see the colors exactly through the filter, but you can see the dark and light contrast. And this grayscale value finder is just a piece of cardboard with 10 steps on the grayscale, and you can lay that on your yarns and kind of get a sense of the value from one to the next. In these two pieces, the pattern is exactly the same, using the same colors, the only difference being the background on one is black and on the other is white. And after looking at this and thinking about it quite a bit, I've always liked using black because I think the colors pop off the black background a little bit more. But in the one on the right, you can see the pattern more distinctly with white as the background. And I just think that's really a fun thing. Here's the same two pieces again, and when the photograph is turned into grayscale, you can really see that as well. The pattern is more distinct on the right. I really do use a lot of black and those bright kind of colors. That's very trademark for me. Value contrast makes so much difference in how easy it is to see the elements of the pattern distinctly. So if the colors are too close in value, they blend together. You can see in this example, the band at the bottom has very little value contrast. And I didn't like this one at all. I considered it to be a failure, but I don't have the same taste as everybody else. My niece really liked that, and so that became a strap for her. Going upwards, the band in the center has a little more value contrast, the gray in the center with the dark green on the sides, and the one at the top has a little more value contrast in there. And again, the grayscale photograph really tells the story. In this page from my book, I showed how the colors can be tinted to intentionally give a design less contrast. So in the, again, I've used color and grayscale photographs. So the one on the left, there's a big contrast between that light beige in the center and the dark brown on the outside with a few mid-range colors. Moving to the right, I toned down the maroon and the orange or coral. So now there's more soft colors in that one with the contrast of the dark border on the outside. And the one on the right, I just toned down all the colors. So now that's a very soft pastel band with little contrast. Each of those could be a good design depending on what you intend to use it for. One of my favorite things to do is to create gradients, arranging colors from dark to light. And usually the darker colors on the outside going towards lighter in the center, but not always. The black and white camera filter, super helpful in lining up the yarn colors in the right order. I mentioned at the beginning that rainbow colored band. I don't think I got all the colors in the right order. If I had used this camera trick, I would have done a better job, I think. To form a good gradient, the colors don't have to even be in the same hue family. Ones that are adjacent on the color wheel, analogous colors, usually look great. But the range can extend beyond that. I tend to use a lot of red, orange, yellow combinations. To me, those represent the colors of fire. And in these bands, the color range is wider, but the one on the left starts with dark colors in the center and gets a little bit lighter going out. That turquoise I put on the outside, and I also put it back in the center. That makes kind of a nice pop of color that way. And the one on the right, I did the same thing, the yellow chain in the center with the pop of yellow at the outside of the band. I could probably do a whole slideshow on color gradients, really. Another good trick, which I talk about a lot in my book, is using a single wide stripe to make it can be used as an outline, a shadow, or an accent. So in this example, the piece on the left is something, this is a vintage piece now. This is one I wove in my teenage years in the 70s. The pattern, graphic pattern in the center represents that band. And it felt like it was kind of missing something. So using the graphic design program, I put a little black stripe between the red and the orange, and the design now is much more, it's a much better design, I think. In these two examples, I used a fine line of a contrasting hue to add some depth and interest, and I refer to this as an accent, a little bit of a surprise. So on the left, there's that dark burgundy with a kind of bright blue next to it. So those two have a nice contrast. And in the one on the right, in between the dark red and the black, I put a little bit of teal, which kind of pops out there. Most of my designs, probably at least 99% of them, are symmetrical. So I thought I'd show a couple that aren't. And even in these asymmetrical designs, I felt like I needed to create some balance. So if there's some kind of weight on the left, there's some kind of something equal on the right. And both of these pickup patterns were intentionally put off balance by moving the pickup pattern to one side and creating a plain weave wider border on the other side. As weavers, a lot of you have probably done yarn wraps to test colors and proportions, and they are very helpful, really. Which color goes next to which? Do I want a little bit of this or a lot of this and a little bit of that? This tool was introduced to me by a friend. It is a hair pick, and it can be used as a sample loom by treating the teeth on the comb as weft. You can go over, under, and mimic the band that you're going to weave. So the photograph at the bottom on the left, I wove it on the comb. And on the right is the band that I wove from that. I decided that I didn't like the little pattern up the center, so I removed it when I wove the band. If the pattern is important, it's a nice way to test it with your exact yarns. For choosing color combinations, this is one of my favorite tools, color.adobe.com. It is a free website with this interactive color wheel. Caution, it can be addictive. There's other similar, there's a lot of color chooser websites, but this one was one of my, remains my favorite one. So one of the easiest color combinations to use is shown here. A monochromatic combination uses tints, tones, and shades of a single color. The dots on the wheel indicate which colors have been pulled out to create the palette of 5 colors in the blocks below it. Here are a few monochromatic combinations that I've woven using black and white in there. And with this color chooser, it's with the color wheel in the center, in the upper left-hand corner, are all these color combinations. So you can choose, you can ask it to create you an analogous combination, triad, split complementary, various different things. Super fun to play with. Um, this combination here is complementary colors of blue and brown, or kind of turquoise and terracottas. I use a lot of these color combinations. I don't know, maybe it's being in the Southwest, that's kind of classic colors for here. Some of the colors that are opposite on the color wheel, like red and green, are harder to use, but I find this very easy to use. And I'll show you some of my inspiration for a couple of pieces. This is looking off my back deck at the Sandia Mountains, which are between me and Albuquerque. The sunset one evening I thought was quite pretty, so I took that photograph and put it into color.adobe.com. And you can see in this photograph, there's little circles on my sunset photograph there. So the tool is keying in on those colors, and it's chosen those and created a palette represented in the 5 blocks below it. So I picked out yarns as closely as I could to match those, and this is the band on the right that I wove from that. Here's another one, Pendleton blankets. I love Pendleton blankets. This one's on my bed, and one morning as I was making the bed, I thought, oh, I should use that color combination. So I put it into the color.adobe.com color chooser tool, and this is the palette that it came out with. Usually when I use a source for inspiration, I like to have my piece match it in that using the same color proportions. In this case, the blanket has a lot of white or off-white, and I don't use a lot of white in my weaving. So the 2 pieces on the right are ones that I wove using the blanket as inspiration. Now, if you didn't see them next to each other, you might think they were completely unrelated, but that's where I started with this, with these 2 designs, is using the colors in the blanket. So they may not have ended up the same, but that's where they got their start. This little pot on the left was one that my husband purchased on a visit to Acoma Pueblo, and I really loved that periwinkle colored against the terracotta of the red clay. But there's not much value contrast between the 2. So when choosing the yarns to weave, I added in a dark brown and a light off-white to go with it. A lot of objects from my household have inspired colors for weaving. I often sit on the floor in the living room on this Pakistani knotted carpet, so I figured I should weave a tribute to it. And here on the right is the piece that I wove. And in this one, I did keep a lot of that off-white color in there. And you can see the red, there's like dots and dashes of the red. So I did a tiny little pickup design in that. To make those red floats, to make the dots and dashes. This is a print from one of my students in an Etsy class that I taught. He is from San Ildefonso Pueblo, and I thought that the colors in that, they're primary colors, but they were just quite beautiful the way he used them. So these 2 pieces were woven from that inspiration. The one at the right is plain weave, and the one across the bottom has a little pickup pattern. This pattern motif came to me out of nowhere when I was designing for my book 3-color pickup for Inkle weavers, but I had the nagging feeling that somewhere I had seen a turquoise arrow with brown and white banded feathers, and when I mentioned it to my husband, he produced that very arrow. It's been hanging in our garage for ages. Another motif for that book. It's found in almost every weaving culture. The rug below was hand woven from wool in Oaxaca, Mexico. And the one at left is a very cheaply manufactured synthetic room-sized rug. And I just see this in so many textiles. It's, I called it the ram's horn. In the photo at the top, the colors were chosen intentionally, inspired by this rock found in an arroyo on my friend's property. And the one on the bottom, the blue agate, is something that's just laying on a shelf in my house. And I wove the blue strap and then went, oh, that looks like that agate. Great match. Here are a couple more examples of the saying, art inspires art. When I find a good color combination that somebody else has used, I might be tempted to use it, as I did with these two bracelets. And this is another one, this one very intentional. I met this lady at a craft fair and she designed beadwork patterns. I bought this bracelet from her and used it as inspiration to weave this piece on the right, which became a camera strap for her. In the photo of the band, it shows the front and back. So this is a Baltic style or speckled pickup design. And where the floats are on the front of the band, they're missing on the back. So they're called pickup patterns, but in this case, it's pick and drop. So you can see sometimes it's hard to choose when I weave a piece. It's like, which should be the front and which should be the back? I don't know. I had to pick. I think it was the one on the left. So this guitar strap pictured on the right was inspired by this painting on a wall. When I used to live in Santa Cruz, California, I drove by this every day on the way to work, and it was a big logo on a hair studio. So I used it for inspiration. I tried to keep the bright green and the dark green kind of in balance with a little bit of red in that chain up the center. And just a couple darker green lines. This hand knit yarn bomb had so many amazing colors, and the stripes were all very random. I'm sure the knitter was using up little leftover bits of whatever yarn she had. So I thought that was a great idea. In my tribute to it, I used up small amounts of my leftover yarns, and how much yarn I had, that was what dictated the stripe. If it only went around once, that's what I did. If it went around 3 times, great. And I think that the finished piece kind of has the same look. I was really happy with that one. This classic double diamond pattern in red, black, gray, and white appears in the Navajo weaving on the left, as well as a glazed tile from Arizona there in the center. And my woven version, I did in 3-color pickup as a guitar strap here. This is my friend Emily Trujillo. She's an 8th generation weaver in her family from the weaving village of Chimayo, New Mexico. We bought this piece from her at the traditional Spanish market in Santa Fe. And I really liked that asymmetrical little motif she did in the center. So I used her colors and did a little asymmetrical pattern in this strap. These 2 bags are from Emily's family's shop. They both bear recognizable motifs from the Chimayo tradition. The one on the left, I thought that was a really odd color combination, but I used it to weave a guitar strap. And the one on the right, I used wool to weave a strap that would match one of the little bag that I bought. This isn't my weaving. This is from another weaver named Rose Wells, which I saw this picture in a Facebook group, and I loved the way she'd captured the colors of this print in her woven band. She told me the print is from a calendar, And I think she did a really good job of using the color in the same proportions that they were in the original artwork. And this is one of my calendars. This is a mandala by a pretty well-known mandala artist. And I thought those colors were just too good. So my woven representation. This is another band that I saw in a Facebook group. Diane Wardlow wove this one. It is one of Laverne Waddington's designs from one of her books. And this weaver used the the mola rather in the background for inspiration. In many Native American traditions, these four colors have significance, representing the four directions. I wove several sashes for a friend to take to a Sundance in Colorado, and I found it hard to use the four colors together. It only worked in my way of thinking, if the white and the yellow weren't used next to each other. And maybe that's a quirk with me, but I just found it a little bit of a challenge to put those colors together. But I did manage to get these four done before he took off for the Sundance. October maple leaves inspired this color combination, which includes 2 greens, 3 oranges, and a bright yellow. Sometimes the skies here during our monsoon season get to be this really dark gray color, and I challenged myself to use that gray and find other colors to put with it. The turquoise, blue, and coral all worked nicely. Now, this color match was kind of accidental. I had this little Inklet loom was traveling with me in the car as we were on I-40 driving through the New Mexico landscape. And I realized that the colors I was weaving were the colors of the landscape. This one was very intentional. This photograph is by a very famous Taos photographer, Durant Smith, and I was asked by someone to use that as an inspiration to weave a strap. So this is my little woven landscape piece up at the top. I really like the way that yellow in that bushy plant in the front is so lit up. This was actually on the right. I'm showing 2 pieces that I wove. These are guitar straps for 2 brothers. Mom asked me to make them guitar straps inspired by the logo from this video game, Minecraft. And the little random pixel colors in that logo were intriguing to me. So these are the 2 pieces that I wove from that kind of random checkered. And I even dropped some threads to the back side so you could see the weft showing through a little bit to get more randomization in there. And I never know what people are going to ask for. So there was a guy from a band called Something in Your Teeth, and he wanted to know if I could weave teeth, a design with teeth in it. So this is what I came up with. I've got a 2-inch wide guitar strap, and on the right, I also did a ukulele strap, which is 1 inch in width. This one was a bit of a challenge too. I was to use these cats for inspiration. He sent me a picture of his guitar too. We talked about colors a lot, and here's the design that I ended up with. It's got the grays and the oranges and the white and the black, and a little bit of a stripy, wavy pattern there. Somebody hand drew this sketch and said, "Can you do this?" And sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't. So the piece I wove at the bottom was my best interpretation of this hand-drawn little design. This customer wanted his family tartan colors in the strap, and he chose a Celtic knot pattern. I found it really hard to get the right red, so I had to weave two pieces before I got it right. I just really couldn't choose. Sometimes a good color combination can be used in different ways. Using the pattern editor tool, I created one 4-color pattern, and then I used it to swap the colors, swap the positions of the colors to see which one I like best. And I think I've actually woven a couple different versions of these. A lot of times I weave one piece, and while it's out, while the colors are still out, I think I like that color combination. So I weave a second one before I put the yarn away. Earlier, we saw another piece that I made with this color combo, which is such a classic. These 4 were done in plain weave in the same basic color combination. And here's that gray monsoon season sky color coming up again. I tried it in different iterations with just black, gray, white, and then I started adding different colors in. So I've got some green and some rust color in there. The colors of the rainbow, I think, always work. I found so many fun ways to arrange them. And even if the color order is not the same as they are in the rainbow, they still work. And I've gotten some customer requests to put in different colors, such as pink, right? The one in the center, replace the red with pink, they said. And I thought to myself, that'll never work. But I think it worked okay. The one on the right, they said colors of the rainbow plus pink and brown. It wouldn't have been my choice, but I don't think it's all that bad. It's also possible to add color after the weaving is done, or maybe before. I think this white warp here, my intention is to try painting a warp. But in this instance, I made the warp, wove a white strap. I wove 3 white straps, and I sent them to a professional tie-dye artist who tied and dyed these 2 straps. Okay, that comes to the end of my program. This is a picture of my weaving room, and I put it in color.adobe.com and played around with a color palette from that. I haven't woven this one yet, but it's an intriguing way to come up with a color combination. So my blog is aspinnerweaver.com, and the reason it is that my maiden name is Spinner. That the blog has a lot of resources on it. It's got free patterns, a list of uses for a woven band, frequently asked questions and answers. So it's been a good resource for a lot of Inkle weavers over time. The pattern editor, which I talked about extensively, it can be found here. Again, free online tool. And I talked a lot about color.adobe.com. So there is that website as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I don't know if there's time for questions, or if you want to do that, or if you need to get on to the rest of your meeting.
As well as questions. Your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
Please share just for another second or two, because I couldn't copy down one of the.
Can you show those links again at the end of your presentation?
Ooh.
The very last one.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that.
We'll have the video, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, there we
There
go.
it is.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Annie.
Sure. I'm glad that worked.
Annie, I have a question is, how many different Inkle looms do you typically have going at a time, or do you just finish one before you move on to another one?
I usually have multiple projects. Some can get parked for a very long time. I I think I have about 20 Inkle looms.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, and eight of them are shacked looms, and those are my workhorses. Those are the ones that I use all the time. I've got a floor standing one that I can make longer pieces on. I've got another homemade one that's wider. I can weave up to 6 inches. I've got my Ashford Inklet, which is the only one that'll fit in a suitcase. So that one travels with me. Um, my daughter at the age of like 41 decided to start weaving, but she only wants to weave at my house. So there's often a loom with one of her projects on it. Um, yeah, and I
How,
probably,
I'm sorry, how much length do you usually do before you move on from a project?
um, it depends. I'm usually when I start a project, I have a completed item in mind. So I said I weave a lot of guitar straps. I know exactly what length I want to weave on the loom to get that thing. And I don't weave it any longer because, well, that's not true. I weave it a little bit longer so I cut and save a sample, but I don't weave it, and leave 2 feet of something because I don't have a plan to use that. So I think I'm very practical. I weave to make something that's going to be used. Now, I know some people who just weave a lot of bands and roll them up and put them in a basket or something, but mine are very specific intention when I start. Did I ramble or did I answer your
Nope.
question?
Perfect. Makes sense.
It's a very freeing answer rather than feeling like you need to put on such a length of work. Just do the length you want. I like that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen again. Did
Got it.
everybody have time to copy those down? Yeah.
I love your discussion about color. It's always the thing that's the hardest for me, whether I'm doing something narrow or something big. And you really, really helped clarify in my mind how color works together and some of the ways to improve my color technique as it were. Thank you.
Well, thanks for saying that. I think that, we see color combinations all the time. And why not use some, why reinvent the wheel, right? You find a color combination you like, use it.
Yeah.
But I did talk, in my book a lot about using color in Inkle bands because I don't think there has been, up until now, a lot of discussion about that. An Inkle band is a practical item, grab a couple colors and make a thing. But I think after I did that for a number of years, I realized that, even with 80 threads or less, there's room for artistry in there, and the artful use of colors in there can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Take a break here. So for about 10 minutes, time for library, and please